organisers as well. I wanted to sort of go through a little bit about what we're doing over winter. You may have seen some of the posters around some of the promotional material we're trying to get out. This is our second monthly staged event at Space Academy. We do a public discussion or a public lecture every month on the second Wednesday. And we are also doing some film screenings at here and also at the WEA. We have quite a lot going on actually. We've got next month our public lecture is going to be Reaping Where We Sowed, the housing crisis in New Zealand, which I'm really looking forward to, unlike my, as a first time buyer, our mortgage rates refixing in September, which I will call my housing crisis. And in August, a lecture on the Irish socialist and trade unionist James Connolly. If you are a returning member, it's good to see you back, and if you haven't been to an event before, we are really happy to see you here. We've just passed our 100 members now, overall in New Zealand, of the New Zealand Federation of Socialist Societies. If you are interested in becoming a member, you do get, and I'll do my television infomercial of this, a very cute pin with a copy of Marx's Wage, Labour and Capital, and as we produce these, our newsletter, The Commonweal, which is going to have its second run in October, and then next year we're hoping to put out 3 issues, which is pretty exciting stuff. I'm very proud of the Commonweal actually. I want to say to Martin, our editor, he's somewhere here, thank you again for doing that. I was very happy to be the designer on that, and it's nice to see it out in the public. We are getting some little boxes like you might see at the front, so keep an eye out for those as well. If you did want to become a member, or if you want to join our mailing list, we do have a clipboard up the front by the door. Put your email address down. We can get in touch about membership, or we can send you information on current events coming up. Or look out for any of us who, and I'm not wearing it at the moment, but anybody who's wearing the little pin. We are generally pretty hospitable. I won't say we'll buy drinks, but we will ramble on for a very long time, I'm sure. Tonight's public discussion is around trade union delegates, which we all are on stage here. My favourite events are those of which we can have as many people speaking as possible, so having a wide array of people on the stage and also your voices popping through as well would be really cool. We'll open it up for some more wider questions sort of in the second half. I'm looking forward to hearing quite a bit about this as well. I'm a delegate in a workplace that has 3 different trade unions attached to it, all for the same positions, and it makes no sense. So I'll probably ask some questions to help me out in my particular situation. I'll get the panelists to do a little bit more of a formal introduction, but I would like to just quickly introduce everybody who's on stage here now. So we've got Al Deachin, who is an NZNO delegate and a member of the Health Sector Workers Network. I just say member of, but you were quite involved in it from my understanding. We have Sam Hope, PSA delegate in the state sector, who works for Statistics New Zealand. Shannon Byrnes, who is a PSA delegate in local government, and on the executive of the CSS, and Heiner Benecke, branch secretary for the Lyttelton fourth branch of the RMTU, the Rail and Maritime Transport Union. So I do want to hear a little bit more about what you all bring to your members and your work site. So if you could expand on the first question, which I'm going to ask, what are the strengths that you bring to your union members, and what makes a good union delegate? And conversely, what makes a poor union delegate? Heiner, you've got the mic. If you wanted to go first, please.
two-stage question. Can you please repeat?
What are the strengths you bring to your union members, or strengths you bring as a union delegate, and what makes a good union delegate versus a poor union delegate?
Okay, I'll answer the second part first, because I don't want to focus on me necessarily. I've been working at Port for 7 years, or no, almost 8 years, and I was already a delegate or branch secretary after 9 months of being here. So a good delegate is someone who's prepared to step up. That can be very challenging sometimes, just to get people to fulfill these roles. So one of the reasons why I became a delegate and branch secretary that quickly was simply because my predecessor, unbeknown to me, was leaving. She'd resigned. I got asked to go to delegate training, and the reason I got asked to go to delegate training was the simple fact that I turned up to membership meetings and I made a nuisance of myself by asking questions. So one of the ways that you stand out or you get noticed is by participating. And one of the things that we always impress on our delegates is that you should always have a successor in mind. Succession planning is very important. There's nothing worse for a work area than if suddenly, for whatever reason, due to illness or due to untimely death, or someone being sacked or whatever, or somebody just goes on to another job, and then that work area is left without a delegate. And if there's been no thought given to who will replace that person, or no one being selected, pre-selected as it were, then that can cause a problem. So the very first thing we impress on our delegates is, once you become a delegate, it's up to you to make sure that there is a successor in the wind. And we just title that succession planning. So when I go around to various work sites and I talk to my delegates, I say, how's your succession planning going? Who do you think would be good? Who should we send on delegate training? Who wants to get involved in health and safety as a health and safety rep, and so on. So a good delegate is someone who's proactive in that way, who is prepared to stand up for their workmates, and who actively listens. You've got to be a good listener. If you don't go around and listen, so let's just take a small work area, and I'll just use one of the examples that we have at the port. Our workshop area has various tradesmen, so we've got our own electricians, fitters and turners, mechanics, and boilermakers. And there's about 30 or almost 40 altogether. That work area needs a few key delegates. Now, fortunately, our branch chair is also our main delegate in the workshop, but we're always pulling in other people to the various meetings that we have. You've got to be in touch with what the workers' concerns and interests are, and that means you've got to be quite proactive. There's no point being a delegate if you're a lone voice. A delegate without a mandate is actually no use to anybody. You can then be picked off by management, and if you're just expressing your own personal views and not the views of the collective views of the members you represent, then you will very quickly lose support. Now, although we have elections, I'm an elected delegate and elected branch secretary, very often it comes down to a single nomination. Just actually getting somebody to do the role can be quite challenging. But we do have formal elections, and we are all formally endorsed or directly elected at our AGMs, which we hold once a year. So I think I've got a fairly clear idea of what I think a good delegate is. What is a bad delegate? we tend to weed our bad delegates out and replace them with somebody else. Someone who's actually not stepping up and not engaged, that they're not much use to anybody. I guess with the active succession planning that we do, I don't actually end up dealing with many people that I would consider bad delegates. We actively train our delegates, make sure that they have successors in mind. Then we have a natural transition. We're very rarely left in the situation because we put the onus on the delegate to make sure that there's a successor in the wind. We really, very rarely have a situation where we have anyone consider a bad delegate. It can be quite challenging dealing with the members and their individual concerns. You often have to put your own opinions and prejudices to one side, especially if you're representing somebody in a disciplinary. It's incredible. It's extraordinary the kind of things that people get in trouble for, and it's extraordinary the kind of bullshit you sometimes hear and have to deal with from both managers and what your members have got up to. But everyone is entitled to representation, and we will always represent. We can't defend. I mean, sometimes people think we're like lawyers. We're not. We always represent the members to the best of our ability, and ensure that due process is followed. Because sometimes that's our only defence against some of the ridiculous things that people will get up to. The first part, what do I bring to it? I mean, this is almost a bit of a sort of a HR interview type.
I've given you the whole thing off the bat. We can leave that for a second question if you'd like.
I don't want to sort of blow my own trumpet because it's without collective action and without sticking together, and that means always canvassing opinion. One of the things that I've found that I'm quite good at over the years is groups like this, and this would be a small group. I mean, we sometimes our branch committee meetings, especially when we're about to go on strike and we've got like 60% of our membership at the port there or more, it can get quite contentious, and you get people who have very strong opinions, and they start getting pretty rowdy and having a go at each other. The natural tendency is to sort of shut down what you think is outrageously contentious, but I've found in situations like that, you've got to let everybody have their say, and I only make matters worse if I try and shut down someone who's got something particularly contentious to say, which possibly most of the rest of the room find quite outrageous. In democratic processes, I've found it's extraordinary sometimes how you learn to read the room, but it's extraordinary sometimes how you think that there is a prevailing opinion in the room, and you think the vote is going to go another way, but when the vote actually happens, the silent majority, they decide something else. They have actually been listening, but they're not the ones out there expressing the most strongly felt or positional views. So, so long as you allow everybody the opportunity to say what they need to say, and I will shut it down when I realise somebody's basically repeating himself and then pass on the word to somebody else. So I'm actively directing the conversation in that way. Then I actually trust that our members will make the decision that is right for them as a group. It's also important, I think, in those situations to acknowledge, although we occasionally have unanimous decisions, it's actually really good to have not a split decision, but you have your small group of naysayers. But so long as whatever decision you make, there is a clear majority, then the people in the minority will accept that. The last thing you want is a Brexit situation where it's basically 50-50 or 51-49, something like that. Then you haven't actually resolved the issue, and you're probably going to have to revisit it in the near future. So democratic processes are very important. I feel it's my role as a branch leader or a branch official to facilitate that process and let everybody have a say until we can come not to a consensus, but to a democratic decision about how we're going to proceed. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Heiner. A lot of these things go back to some we did maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, at the WEA, some delegate training with John Kerr, another member of the CSS and RMTU or
Yep.
yeah RMTU organiser or delegate. Some really good crossover between things that you wouldn't necessarily put together. You could probably put what he taught in organising alongside any sort of managerial sort of role. I think that the people skills and using the ideas of the group to help them help themselves was the best thing that I learned for a really long time in that training that we did, and I hope that we get to do some more soon. Just before I pass on, I just wanted to get a bit of a show of hands. I know we've got a lot of members here, but is there anybody here who, I'll just do a show of hands. Hands up if you're part of a union at your workplace. Is anybody a delegate at their worksite? Or has been in the past? Yes, sweet. Is anybody sort of reasonably unfamiliar with the organisational structure around trade unions in New Zealand? Yes, sweet. So, I mean, in essence, and it's good that we've got a really educated group of people, and it may be a little bit different, especially in the RMTU, but in general process, we'd have the head office of the union generally, and some of those can be quite bureaucratic. And on the other flip side of that, we've got all the rank and file union members. And each worksite will generally elect a delegate, which we are, to represent the union members on that site and perform some various tasks. And sort of mid-step between that, there's an organiser who's a paid union official who will sort of be the, I guess, almost like a delegate for the delegates, if that makes sense. But yeah, I know you've got some differences in the way that you work in the RMTU.
Ours is a very traditional structure.
It is traditional.
We still have branch sites and all our branch officials are elected. We only have 5 regional organisers, but essentially everything. I mean, I still work for the port, although only part-time, and all our delegates are also workers for whichever company they work for.
For sure.
Employees, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I talk now?
You asked the question.
I know. Kia ora koutou. So my name is Sionainn, and I work for Christchurch City Libraries, so I guess local government, and that way part of the council. I'm a learning specialist and I'm a member and delegate of the PSA. So I did have a bit of a spiel to talk about in terms of like my role and issues that we face and stuff, but I'll just, I presume we'll get onto that at some stage. This
Are there issues in the PSA?
There's a lot of issues, yeah. Pretty shitty association. No, they're listening on the live stream. One word. That's all right. No, but what I will say is that this question threw me a little bit because I've been a delegate for just over a year, and I'm a delegate at a workplace, South Library, where there are no other delegates, and there are very few actual union members as well. I wasn't elected in the sense that, there was a desire for a delegate. I asked a workmate of mine to sponsor me, and they said yeah, I guess so, and then I became the delegate. So not democratic in that way necessarily. If I think about what I bring to my team in workplace and libraries as a delegate, I think I'm very approachable and available to people, sensitive to people and team dynamics and changes in people and the environment. If I think about what Heiner just said, what makes a good delegate, succession planning, being open to training, that together I don't really know how that sounds different than what makes a good manager, to be honest, all of that stuff. So I'm not sure that it's the skills that make you a good delegate necessarily, or a bad one, or whatever in this scheme of things, but it's the ideological position that you take in that relationship, and essentially the side that you come down on, I think. That just seems to me, yeah. So that's kind of the problem for me, and I'm just being a bit evil to you there. But yeah, the sense of like stepping up and all that kind of stuff, I think these are things that maybe we could problematise a little bit in this conversation. But yeah, I'll try to be a good delegate in the future.
I think as long as you're taking those conversations out of the kitchenette and putting them in a place where they can actually be used.
Well, I also think that in the same way that workplaces empower particular individuals to be good managers, so do unions empower particular people to be good at being delegates or not. That's a really interesting conversation when it comes down to what kind of union you're part of.
Sure.
But again, we can come back to that.
My name's Sam. I'm also a PSA delegate, and I can corroborate a lot of what Chan said about the supposed sort of democratic election of delegates. I was they're looking for people, so basically you fill out a form and everyone's all good with it. I think in terms of what makes a good delegate, picking up some of the stuff on what Heiner said, I think definitely listening to your membership is key. I think first and foremost, kind of remembering that you're an active member. You're not some sort of extension. You're not some special part of the union. You're not paid to do it. You're kind of part of that collective, and you hold the interests of that collective at heart. But it's interesting being in I'm very much in a kind of office-based workplace. Although we do have a bit of a split, Stats NZ, we're a state sector agency. It's tricky to get accurate numbers from HR, despite all the systems and the amount of staff they have. But we're looking at around 1,200 staff across New Zealand, around the main centres, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and there's a split. So some of them are field staff, so going out doing surveys, knocking on doors. Others are in the office, like myself. So our delegate structure is kind of split along those lines as well. But we do kind of interact, and we kind of have shared concerns. So speaking from a kind of office-based perspective, I think there's a degree to which you have to listen for sure, but there's also kind of framing of issues and kind of perhaps politicizing of issues in some cases, because we often end up being like a health and safety committee arguing about a door that's kind of opening the wrong way in the office, and there's also you go down these rabbit holes. And it's kind of reframing some of the sometimes the more minor details of the office workplace, and trying to see some of the broader kind of shifts and political changes and how that's affecting people's work. I'm thinking off the top of my head, one of the key ones recently is around the whole working from home, flexible working policies. While it's been very prevalent during lockdown and COVID times, I think it kind of predates that, and there was a bit of a trend towards more flexible working, which is often means like less desks for people, less setup, so people are relying on their home setups and power and all that sort of stuff, and that's really tricky to try and work through those issues with employers and try and bargain and make claims around, you're kind of basically extending the workplace into my home. Can I have some setup costs paid for this? So there's things like that. I think, So I think that kind of, for me, my role is kind of coordinating some of those ideas, trying to reframe them in different ways. The PSA has like a very, some would say like a collaborative relationship with, or partnership, they often refer to it, with management. So you find yourself in a lot of meetings with management, and that can at times become a bit of a tick boxy exercise for them. So it's trying to navigate that and trying to be strategic around that and kind of make sure that you follow up on the things that you said you're going to do with your members. So you're always going back to the minutes about building that trust. So I probably rambled. There's a lot of stuff in there, but I don't know if I've.
No, it makes sense. For somebody who has gone through that exact same thing with working from home, and apologies to talk about it at all, Al, because I know that you
wish you could.
Hospital. It can be a little bit tricky, especially with collective bargaining over a work from home process. But I will pass to Al, and thank you. It's nice to see you here.
Hi, I'm Alistair. I'm an HCA or a healthcare assistant at Christchurch Hospital. I've been a delegate with every union I've been involved with. When I was in education as a caretaker in schools, I was a delegate for the Service and Food Workers Union. I was a delegate as an orderly. Currently I'm the co-convener or co-chair of the Workplace Organising Committee at Christchurch Hospital, which is basically all the delegates in the hospital meet monthly and discuss issues and work out plans for dealing with those issues and blah blah blah. What makes a good delegate to me, I think, is like I think Heiner alluded to before, is good listening. That's probably one of the most important things, and that's something that I find knowing a lot of people throughout the hospital, speaking to a lot of people, finding out obviously by doing the job alongside others, intricately what the issues are, but also having those moments of one-to-one conversations with people. Trying to determine a lot of the time what are the most sort of like, in terms of union speak, what are the most widely and deeply felt issues, and then trying to collectivise those issues and work together to solve those issues. So that's something that as a delegate can be really challenging, but is an important part of it, to actually get members involved and not expecting you to solve their problems, but you solving the problems with them, so doing it together. I wouldn't say that I've ever come across a bad delegate as such. It's more the case that there's delegates that just don't really engage a lot or aren't really active, and often that's for personal reasons or whatever. They may get sort of like pushed into the role because no one else wants to do it, so they, I was at a delegate Zoom day today on collectivism with delegates from different parts of the South Island, and a couple of the ones there were new delegates that basically were there only because no one else wanted to do it, and they were kind of like, come on, you can do it sort of thing, and pushed into it. But once they become a delegate, having the support from other delegates, like we do with the Workplace Organising Committee, to help educate them to then go out and help organise and collectivise on the floor, because really the delegate is an organiser. We're really trying to organise our fellow workers to deal with the issues that we face on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure what else to say right now.
Oh, that's good. And I suppose I didn't introduce myself as well, but I am a union delegate for the first union I work for IAG Insurance, and we've got a split collective agreement with the PSA, which is just due to the history of IAG Insurance, and there's also an in-house union. So it does get really tricky, but one of the best things that I have found, and it is doing it with other people, to get issues solved. There's a lot of things that if you're new to being a delegate and you go through delegate training, you'll go through the bullet points of sort of things that you'd expect to do as a delegate, which is disciplinary meetings, going to collective bargaining, health and safety. But there's a lot of stuff which I've found has been really good. Getting to know the management in your work site, them knowing that you're a delegate and giving them your members' views, working with them to get stuff done ad hoc. I think there's a really strong power in that. But I did want to touch on, and I'll pass back to you, Al. Sam spoke of politicisation of the workplace, but outside of that, I know that you've had quite a lot of involvement, and for all of us here on stage, we are CSS members, so doing quite a lot outside of our union delegate roles in terms of politics, but your involvement with the HWSN has been outside of your union, but in the spirit of trade unionism. Is there a way that we can use either the union or non-union means to promote socialist ideas and try to foster a more militant rank and file network?
I'm a founding member of the Health Sector Workers Network. The ideas sort of were inspired by the influences I had from anarcho-syndicalism, but also, I guess, revolutionary unionism of organisations like the Industrial Workers of the World. And the idea of the one big union. I've worked in the health sector most of my life. I've worked in the laundries, I've worked as cleaning, I've worked as an orderly, student nurse, healthcare assistant, and so I have a clear picture of what it's like doing different jobs. And one of the things that's always really frustrated me is the internal hierarchies that exist within the health sector, and the number of different unions that exist within the health sector. In so many areas, there's competing unions for the same job, like Apex and PSA organising in theatres or in the labs, Maris and NZNO both organising midwives, Stones, which is a newly formed scab union of junior doctors, and NZRDA, so you've got a number of different unions that are trying to organise and organise around their own sort of collective interests of that particular set of workers, but sometimes it can be at the detriment of other sets of workers, or the bosses use that as a way to pit worker against worker. I know when Stones were formed, which is the Specialty Technicians of New Zealand, which was a group of junior doctors that wanted to sort of specialise in they didn't sort of like the conditions of NZRDA, and I think there was probably other political reasons maybe, but they essentially in their forming and in their bargaining that they undertook undermined some of the conditions that the NZRDA members had actually fought for and taken strike action over. And so the reason I could form the Health Sector Workers Network with others was that I saw that we needed to be building a lot more cross-union solidarity in the health sector, like taking ideas of the one big union, that organising industrially, and the fact that if we're not separated by profession or job or whatever, that we can have a lot more strength that way. In terms of the politicisation, I think that as a rank and file network, and with HSWN, it was basically formed amongst anarchist comrades or socialist comrades who all sort of shared similar sort of ideology, I guess, but in a way bringing those political views through trying to build and connect within the workplace to further the ideas that we espouse. I can maybe discuss it more informally during the discussion time.
That'd be quite funny. It'd be good to know a little bit more. Does anybody else want to speak to that point around, I suppose, trying to bleed out our politics into our union membership?
I mean, one thing I'll say, is that going into a workplace and trying to organise on ideological grounds just doesn't work, in my opinion. We need to be looking at what the key issues are that people have and organising around those. And it's about needs. You know, like if we can sort of like collectively focus on fighting for whatever needs we have, through those struggles, people do become more politicised naturally. And you know, the ideas of socialism, or like, you know, things like solidarity, for example, you know, like people learn that through struggle. So you know, like that's one thing I found with some of our MECA struggles in the last few years and strikes that we've had, is that the longer these struggles have gone on and the more that the DHBs have tried to shit on us, the more angry and the more politicised members have become, because they're sort of like, it's that whole, yeah, that thing when they become sort of more engaged in the struggle, they look for ideas and they want to go further with that struggle, and so that's a prime time for ideas to be introduced and to foster and grow. So that's, you know, where I think is a crucial area of getting, you know, like socialist politics involved in things.
I think Al has just pretty much explained the organising principle really well. There's no point, I completely agree with him, there's absolutely no point going anywhere into a worksite and trying to force your ideological view upon anyone. People will just switch off. You gain respect, the respect of your workers, and you have a lot more mana if you identify the issues that are important to those members and you organise around that. In that sense, Al is right, you do politicise people, and whenever something comes along that is going to piss workers off or that they feel strongly about, that's your organising opportunity. That's your opportunity. In those situations, somebody will step up and take the lead, and you can encourage them, and it's exactly in those situations that new leaders emerge, and then people who've possibly never been much involved in the union before, they get a sense, yes, this is for us, this is something that's important to us, and in that way you can actually achieve change, achieve improvement in terms and conditions. So that's absolutely right. I often hear that from, you know, someone like an old fart now, younger people, say, oh, why aren't the unions doing this, or why don't you do that, and so on. Well, join the union, get involved, and start doing something. And you know, you often hear people say, oh, well, you know, the union's doing this or the union's doing that, you know, but ideologically or politically you should be doing this. Well, we're nothing if not pragmatic. If it's not going to further the interests of our members, then what's the point? Sometimes you will actually come to an agreement with management that is unpalatable, but it depends on what the alternative is. I've been through a number of strikes, and you know, oh man, sometimes online when I see this nonsense of people going, oh, why don't we all go on a general strike? Yeah, right. Is that possible in New Zealand under our current legislation? No. You know, the days of general strikes are longer. We don't even have the union density for it anymore. And you certainly can't go on strike unless you are a member of the union, and unless it's in support of claims during bargaining or for health and safety reasons. Our right to strike is incredibly restricted. But that said, once you actually get your members to go on strike, it's even harder to get them back in the door. Once they're out and they start enjoying this and sticking it to the boss, getting them to agree to a settlement is even harder. Because then you have to come to a compromise. You're never going to get everything that you want. So, but you only prepare your members for situations like that by doing exactly what Al says, organising around the day-to-day concerns of your members, no matter how small or trivial that might seem to you when you first hear about it. Because it's through it you learn about this kind of thing by doing. You learn about how to organise and become a leader by organising And it's amazing in those situations who will step up and lead those members in those moments.
Hello. So I'll just say that I've had precisely the opposite experience in my workplace. And so this probably has to do with we haven't yet talked much about our workplaces. But we have very low union density relative to the libraries, which is relatively high union density. When you get to a certain role and pay grade, that drops off, partly because individual employment agreements are incentivised for various reasons. There are lots of reasons why anyway, but I've actually found that in my job I've had much more success coming to people from a strictly ideological position, and in fact from a CSS position, than I have from a PSA position. There's very little faith in the PSA, precisely because they don't actually really stand for anything in particular, and I think that that is actually one of the weaknesses of the organisational model of unions, is that they rely on members to come up with the political and ideological agenda while also working full time. So that's, maybe a weakness. So I think, and again, to do with my job, I have a relatively good job. I have flexible working hours, I have flexible working conditions, I'm competitively paid in regards to the primary and secondary school teachers, not that that's right, but I am. And so day-to-day conditions are a little bit trickier than they would be if you were working on necessarily the floor and to different hours and stuff like that. We don't have penal rates, we don't have anything like that. We have quite luxurious day-to-day conditions, if I'm really honest. It's not to say that we don't have issues in the workplace like the stretch of job sizing and crank and all that kind of stuff, but that's not necessarily where you get people, and you find that the people who are members of a union in this part of the organisation are so because they are sympathetic to unionism ideologically, not because they specifically have any belief in the PSA or their specific union. I guess that's what I have to say. Probably, I'm trying to answer the questions. Sam.
Yeah, I think, it is, the workplace and the nature of the work just definitely has a bearing on this. I think, where health and safety matters in the context of my workplace, and that's not, may seem quite trivial compared to, in the ports. I think there's definitely, I mentioned earlier that we've got this kind of split. We've got our field force that goes out and surveys and stuff. So one of the things that I'm kind of interested in listening to this is thinking about what are the common interests and how can we link up the interests of people working in the office versus those out in the field who we actually rely on as an organisation. We rely on people going out and doing surveys so people in the office can do their work, processing the data. So it's that kind of idea of politicising around that stuff I'm kind of thinking about, where we allow people who may be working in that office environment to think a bit about the wider organisation and how they can support, how our membership in the office can support those out in the field who are traditionally on lower pay, and how we can organise around that in bargaining, and how we get our messaging out around that, around the importance of lifting the pay and conditions of those out there in the field. I think there's a few things that impact organising in my particular context in our workplace, which is we're seeing, particularly in the state sector, an increasing reliance on external recruitment agencies, which is a really tough one for one membership. I mean, we could go out and make them a member and invite them to be a member, and they could join, but we have no ability to cover them under the collective and ensure that their paying conditions are, match what we can bargain for. So I see that as one of the key challenges for us. I think the context is very different, I think.
Look at our ask the question there, when we're talking about basically outsourcing, are those roles that are covered by your collective agreement?
No.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the problem.
Exactly.
You've got to try and get the coverage extended because we're fundamentally opposed to outsourcing, and whenever managers, we've had a raft of managers. They often last only about 3 years. So I'm on to my third CEO. But that kind of situation is anathema to unionism because you can't, those people who are recruited in through those agencies, they're not on your terms and conditions and you've got no way of influencing. So
happens all the time in the health sector. Happens all the time. Nurses from recruitment agencies, they'll be working alongside someone who's on 35, 40 bucks an hour, and they're on way less because they're an agency nurse and they're doing the same job, and there's nothing you can do about it because they're outsourced.
It's difficult, especially once that has happened.
Happens all the time.
The only way is to fundamentally oppose the outsourcing and get. Does that mean those roles are covered by your collective agreement, but there are also people doing that role? Yeah.
Yep.
No, that's wrong.
Yep.
I just what's happened recently with COVID and the fact that like staffing at the moment is really bad. Like I think we're up to, I'm not sure what it is at the moment, but a few days ago there was something like 180 frontline staff off on COVID isolation. They've been redeploying people from different areas to help with that. So you'll get people come in and they will do sort of nurse related roles, but they can be directed to do certain jobs and work alongside us. But yeah, they essentially don't get what we get in terms of pay and conditions. The Ministry of Health actually had a program that they set up a little while ago relating to that, trying to bring people in to help out in hospitals. I spoke to an HCA the other day at dinner break, which is actually a really good time to have conversations, is when you're at dinner break with people. But anyway, and she was part of this program, and basically the Ministry of Health, anyone that applied through this program was basically directed straight towards an employment agency, who then had the role of helping with the staffing and placement of these people. So she was working essentially doing the same role that I was doing. She wasn't getting any of the penalty rates that I get. She wasn't getting pretty much any of the conditions or wages that that we receive as union members. So that's something that's like really been sort of noticeable in recent times with COVID happening with the hospitals. So yeah.
I suppose that leads into another question that I was going to ask around our current workplace law, which I guess since the early 90s with the change to the ERA, and somebody did send in a question to regarding this really, but it leads into a whole bunch of things. If you're talking about bringing in new membership and a sort of active rank and file, specifically in a lot of industries that may be more clerical or industries that have really low union penetration at the moment, retail and that sort of thing. Some of the, like FPAs, while a good thing for workers in general, bringing up the floor of wages could also have a negative effect on a coalesced rank and file union member network. Does anybody have any thoughts around how these changes are going to affect their particular unions? Because I know in the health sector it's probably going to be one of the first industries that may pass FPAs. I know that's what it's been sold as anyway.
I feel like it's an organiser's role to know the legalities of that, not a delegate's.
Yeah. I'm getting a little bit extracurricular here. I suppose, do you have any thoughts on the future of what's going to happen with our unions, with these changes, are we going to be set without a right to strike, with a very limited right to strike?
But our right to strike at the moment is very limited anyway.
But that's what I mean.
So, you know, and to be honest, there's not many unions that have a stomach for a strike. There are organisers in this country who, you know, are petrified at the notion of going on strike, and they will avoid it at all costs. So, and you've got to remember that a strike is often your last resort.
Mm.
You know, it's the thing, if it happens, it gets the headlines. But there's a long process that's happened before you get there. They're often, you know, usually it's when you've been in bargaining for such a long time, you just get pissed off, you know, you're not making a breakthrough. It's very rare, in this country at least, that, you know, you pretty much go straight to a strike belt.
Mm.
In fact, you can't, because you have to prove, you have to demonstrate good faith, and that you've tried to bargain in good faith, but you've basically got nowhere. So, for us, I don't think it's really going to make a hell of a lot of difference. You know, we have strong collective agreements, and we have high density union membership on our sites. In Kiwi Rail, basically anyone in the rank of works at Kiwi Rail is in the RMTU. On the waterfront, we have at least two unions. Two main unions on the waterfront, Maritime Union and Rail Maritime Transport Union. The fact that we haven't quite managed that final amalgamation, when there were a lot of amalgamations 20 to 30 years ago, is a shame, but we may get there one day. One union on the waterfront is a common catchphrase, but we haven't quite achieved it. I think you're right in the comment you made earlier. You talk to any rank and file member who's not you know, branch official or higher, you know, like myself, and they understand the logic in the sense that there is a very strong tribal affiliation. I mean, both our unions on the waterfront have a long history, and they are the result of previous amalgamation for a whole lot of unions. So the future, I might put it in sort of just a slightly different context. We've had a sea change at Lyttelton. We have very different management now than we had just 5 years ago. We changed CEO, and we're going through the process of, and this is much aligned with, some of you will have heard of this, some sectors have tried it and it hasn't worked very well, and that's high performance, high engagement. We see that as a very real opportunity, because it is a different way of doing things rather than constantly being at loggerheads. You know, we've been called the most militant union in New Zealand by the media, you know, in recent disputes that we've had. And to be honest, that's not saying much, because unions aren't very militant in New Zealand. The fact of the matter is that we were just prepared to go on strike where often people aren't. But given the CEO that we have now, it's worth a try to try something different. We're going to give that our all. If it doesn't work, we know how to organise and go on strike. If we have to go back to that, we will. But and we don't necessarily like the word collaboration. We like a cooperative approach, okay. Also, I would say avoid this term, this corporate newspeak and things that HR like to say, union partners. You know, okay, look, for fuck's sake, you know, if we're partners, are you going to relinquish some of your managerial prerogatives to us? Don't think so. Managerial prerogative is enshrined in common law in New Zealand. You know, partner suggests that we are equals. So remind your managers of that the next time they go union partners, and say, oh right, so you're going to, you know, relinquish some of your prerogatives to us? You know, you've got the right to hire and fire. That's a very different power dynamic. We represent workers, but they have the power. So the only way we can counter that power is by organising collectively. So union partnership, partners with the management, don't think so.
Definitely agree with that.
I would say that, like, from what I've been experiencing in the health sector, is that I don't think it's going to make any difference. And generally, there's high union density within the health sector, but what's also been happening is that, like, you know, there's been in the last sort of, like, I don't know, 3-4 years, there's been strikes by NZRDA, Apex, Maris, NZNO, PSA.
Yeah, allied recently as well.
Yeah, well, that's part of PSA.
Oh, right. Okay,
Yeah. So, you know, like, and each time, each set of workers in these disputes have been shafted by the DHBs, and essentially the DHBs have continued to operate in what's considered bad faith, time and time again. And, you know, like, I speak to any worker around the hospital, doesn't matter what role they have, no one has a good word to say about the DHBs, and particularly through the bargaining processes that they've been through. So there's a lot of distrust and a lot of anger there. Another thing that I found really interesting is that, especially with what's happened recently with our pay equity struggle and how the government and DHBs have reneged on what was agreed to, which was our back pay to 31st of December 2019, is the number of voices within the union calling for strike action that, you know, like 4 or 5 years ago you wouldn't have seen. Like the level of militancy that's coming out of members, just because of like what we've been through and what we're going through at the moment with the state of the health system and how fucked up it is. People are really angry. They're burnt out, but they're also really angry, and you know, like it actually inspires me when I see a lot of these conversations starting to happen more and more. You know, like so yeah, who knows where it could lead with our new campaign, But Only Am I.
That's a very spiffy hoodie.
That's a real nice.
I suppose, in contrast to Alan Heiner, my workplace is extremely low union penetration. And when I reference things like the fair pay agreements and how they may affect us getting members, because a lot of the conversations are, well, the first is which union should I join anyway, because there's 3, which is ridiculous anyway. You know, most of the new stuff that are coming in start ground floor, phone agents. They're quite young, they don't have even a family history a lot of the time of unionism. And you can tell my public speaking is fantastic, but even I can't seem to gather so many ticks on a membership application. With fair pay agreements, I don't know how that would necessarily affect the sort of nonsense email jobs that we do, but you know, like there's that sort of floor of pay and conditions which these could bring into a whole bunch of jobs, and I know that in your industries it's very much different to some of the sort of clerical and low union density jobs that some of us may be part of. So it's good to see that the militancy is the way that I'd put it. And you spoke of being described as a militant union, but in their words is probably just another way to phrase very well organised and with high density union. But I wanted to thank everybody for what they've said so far, and I think it's probably a good time to see if anybody wants to put their hand up and shout across the room if they've got any questions for our delegates on stage. Matt?
Oh yeah, I member of the Socialist Society and
You speak up, Matt.
yeah, member of ETO, who is formerly the engineers union. And I kind of disagree a little bit. Perhaps it's okay for you guys because most of you represent educated workers. In the engineers union, most of us aren't educated, and we're open to ideology. Most of us don't have an ideology. We don't have an educated ideology that we can argue back against. We don't have a pro-capitalist ideology. So I think that perhaps in the engineers union, at least you can introduce ideology. You can say we are the working class, we produce the products, we are the essential workers, we are the ones that capitalism needs the most, and we are the ones that can overthrow capitalism.
Just want to say that I
Go
was
for it.
for ideology of the workplace.
Can I just say, Matt, that like from my experience that I hear what you're saying, but it has to come about through struggle, and like it's in those moments of struggle that when you're organising together and you're standing shoulder to shoulder with your workmate, and you're there because you've got a collective gripe and that you're wanting to solve that problem and you want to fight for that problem. That's when that's when you can introduce the ideology, because that's when like the struggle increases, and where the ideas, you know, like it's a breeding ground for it, you know. And so I don't think that it's that easy outside of those day-to-day things. I mean, it has to come hand in hand with it. Like, you know, in your workplace, when you've got issues going on, unless you're sitting there with your workmates in the tea room and you're talking about those issues, and then you're getting to the point where you're going to say, okay, well, let's do something about that, and you actually realise and identify that you have a collective strength by standing together. That's the moment where, you know, these opportunities arise.
But, sorry, Al. I don't disagree with anything you've said. I will say that ideology is meaningless without collective struggle, but I would rather be on the front foot when the struggle comes about than sort of just like, you know, we have the luxury of having this kind of the benefit of history and other struggles and stuff, and it doesn't make sense to me to not bring that perspective into and those kind of historical precedents into the way that we experience work and organise now, to at least have somewhere to start rather than always being reactive. I mean, that's the tradition that we are part of. That's the point of the tradition, is that we have somewhere to start and we build, even in those times of cooling off, because it's not always a time of like intense struggle or a time of revolutionary action or anything, that we just stop like doing anything until we have the struggle again. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree that there are a lot of employers who are very good at placating employees as well, to get them to a level that it's not quite a struggle, but it's also not very good. It's what we've got at my worksite, and it certainly doesn't help galvanise.
It's apples and oranges in a way, sorry. But,
Definitely.
you know, just that's the point of this head.
I would say, Matt, you should come down to the port sometime. You'll be surprised at the discussions that go on in the smoto room. Most of the members I represent, well, no, these days it's very diverse. Traditionally, they weren't very well formally educated, but these days you get a whole cross-section of people coming in and working at the port in all sorts of different roles, and it's not as stratified as it used to be. But to put it very bluntly, put it very simply, it's the difference between talking, you know, and we can all talk and have ideas, and actually doing. And the kind of thing that Al's talking about is actually organising, you know, and you're actually doing something. And we focus a lot more on that. It's not that our uni doesn't have ideological positions, but that is, and you know, like people like me don't go to the roles that I have without, you know, some sort of optimism, idealism, or you know, an ideological grounding. But if you, I mean, because our density is so high, I'm not just sitting around with a few like-minded people. I'm very often in a room full of members who have very divergent opinions, sometimes opposing opinions, and they express themselves very, very forcefully. I mean, you know, we often have. I've been to one of the first meetings I went to the RMTU. There were literally people yelling at each other. I wondered, where the hell have I come to? What's going on here? So, you know, how do I unify or come to a common position with people like that? And you can only do that by, you know, by identifying what are the common interests. And then when we organise around that, we get, you know, it's an expression of solidarity for each other. So we're always looking at what is our collective position on anything. It's and so in a sense, I don't really care what, well, I do, you know, I do personally, but you know, to do my role effectively, I don't care what the political views of my individual members are. what's important is how we act collectively. And it's surprising sometimes, even the people who I've met, I read the first election that came along after I was branch secretary. I was quite surprised at the number of my members who voted bloody New Zealand first. But hey, there you have it.
Good old Winston.
Populists always get votes. So I'm not about enforcing or trying to force my ideology on any of my members. They all know where I stand. I have outed myself as a socialist at a meeting in front of everybody. I stand by myself. No more Reds in the Union in front of like 100 members. I was ridiculed at first, but because I pulled it off reasonably well, I got a round of applause. So you show your own colours, and then by doing good work and collectively organising, and everyone sees the benefit of that, you can bring people along with you. But yeah, I think it's enough.
I was just gonna if we're talking about how to bring ideology into the workplace. I mean, this is one of the things that with the Health Sector Workers Network, because it was more of a wouldn't say necessarily revolutionary project, but a more militant project that sort of had certain aims and principles that were anti-capitalist and sort of bigger picture socialist sort of aimed. Some of the core things that we would try and do was that age-old agitate, educate, inoculate, organise union,
Inoculate.
Get your booster.
Yeah, but so, and we found it really effective, because the history with HSWN is NZNO has been through a lot of trouble internally in the last sort of 5 or so years, well, longer than that, but it's been really come to a head in the last sort of 5 or so years with special meetings called to oust our president and counter special general meetings being called and petitions going around to members and all sorts of conflict. Out of Health Sector Workers Network, the members that were in NZNO formed what was called the Members Action Group, and out of that there was the decision made to run a campaign to get elected for the board of directors, which is essentially it's got a corporate structure. There's a CEO and a board of directors in the union, but essentially it's the governing body. And basically the Members Action Group was there to try and agitate and organise members, and primarily around internal stuff to do with sorting NZNO out. We ran a campaign called the Mag 5, where we had 5 delegates run for the board of directors. Out of that, 4 members got elected onto the board, and 6 months later or something like that, 3 of those members that were also Health Sector Workers Network members resigned because of they couldn't sort of continue in those roles and maintain their integrity because of the level of nepotism and corruption and shit that was going on. So that was an example of trying to organise members to take action to sort out our union. Since that time, Anne Daniels has become president of NZNO. Now she's been a good friend and a member of these networks for some time. So that's been able to achieve that. The thing that the Health Sector Workers Network did successfully with some of our campaigns is to introduce ideas and push the struggle further. When in 2018, when we were in our meta bargaining and taking strike action, there was the type of bargaining that was being undertaken was issues-based bargaining, and it was a different approach to bargaining, and there was no clear idea around claims around a specific wage increase or any of those sorts of things. And so HSWN came up with a term called 18 and 18, so it was 18% in 2018, and that very quickly was picked up by NZNO members and was spread very widely. and was taken in as like a central part of what members were calling for. And so that's I guess, yeah, in a long way, roundabout way of saying it, an opportunity where we could use our ideological position as what we're trying to achieve to introduce ideas within the struggle to push them further.
I just had a real quick response to that around education. So it's like working in quite a highly, I suppose it's a professionalised workforce. There's a lot of tertiary educated people in there, and yet the education around unionism is very poor. And this isn't just a plug for the CSS, but I think I've learned more about unionism through the CSS and encountered more other unions than through the PSA itself. So I think that's the angle that I'm coming at education from when it comes to in the workplace, and just even politicising some of the ideas, like understanding what it means to be in a union and that relationship to the employer. That is very lost on a lot of people coming in straight out of uni or you know who haven't been in a large organisation before. So it's that. But it's pleasing to me because I have seen in recent sort of inductions we've done, and we've talked to potential members coming in, that there's a bit of an uptake, and it's, I think, because of the stuff, the action that we're seeing in the media. So that's promising to me. But I think there is a level of education that really needs to occur at that level, just around understanding of the role of the union and ongoing with managers as well, trying to explain what a collective is to a manager.
Actually, you touched on something here. One of my main roles has been educating managers over the years, because the managers come and go, and the union remains. I actually joke openly with some of our HR people. We've got good HR people, we didn't always. Whenever we get a new manager, I go to the HR person who's written that area, and I say, we're going to have to educate this new manager, especially if they've come from another sector, and because so much of the New Zealand workforce is no longer unionised, you get managers who've got no experience of unions. They don't know what they're doing. More important than cultivating good relationships with managers for me now is having a good relationship with those key HR people, because those HR people, if they're good, they will manage your manager for you. And then I often have discussions with those key HR people, say, okay, what's the issue? Who do we need in the room? Says, okay, you go and brief your manager. I'll go and talk to our members and see who wants to be the representatives in that room to discuss that issue. And there's a lot of that going on too. Just to get right back to sort of the jibe, the dig that Shannon had at me earlier. There is, well, of course, because you're always doing it, so that's okay. Oh, this is our usual banter.
I can take what I just out.
The skill set that's required to do your job as a senior delegate, or certainly like in my role as a branch official, is very similar to that of a manager. And sometimes we're actually better at it. So you're applying those skills to leading and organising your members. And I mean, I've even had, not even in jest, I've had senior managers ask me if I want to apply for a manager position. My answer to them is quite simply, I said, even if I were interested, I would not do it in this workplace. Is that I in good conscience couldn't do it. First of all, I'd be seen as a traitor by the members that I represent. And second of all, I wouldn't want to. So at some point, and with another manager, I remember having a conversation one time. He said, at some point, you've got to make a decision what side you're on. I said, I've made my decision, so don't ask me that question again.
Thank you, everybody. Tom's got a question.
Yeah, a little way. So, interesting point. No, it's okay. I'll shout. It's an interesting point you made, Sam, about continuous education, because as you know, but not everyone might know, I'm also a PSA delegate. So I've been through the same training as you and the same training as Sionainn, though mine had the benefit of being in person, whereas some people had to do training online, which is obviously always worse. But nonetheless, I think the education around what is the union, what's the point of it. It's not actually in the delegate training, let alone the rank and file, just people who join the union. When I joined,
What is union?
yeah, what is union? Sorry, because we're not meant to say the union. That was one of the stupid newspeak things that CTU brought out a few years ago. We ignore that. We don't worry about that. Who listens to the CTU? Ha ha ha. Anyway, the point being that like I joined the union when I joined the libraries because, okay, to be honest, the conditions were better, but it was also an ideological perspective because the person who came to pitch the union had no idea of how to sell it. It was sold as workplace insurance. You know, you pay into it and you're just protected, like it's an insurance company that's going to take care of you and stuff, and it works in insurance. It's a very interesting way to pitch a union. So I'm curious on a few things, like education from, I kind of know the RMTU situation because John's a member and he used to do all of it when he was still working for the RMTU, but in NZNO and in First, I know you're the chair, but you can answer questions anyway, Nick. And the other thing is something Al brought up around aspects of the bureaucracy in unions and how much control you feel like you have over it. And again, that's kind of a different question for different unions. RMTU, as you mentioned, Heiner, doesn't have a huge amount of officials. My union employs people to be campaigners, you know, on potentially 6 figures a year, and I'm not pulling that out of my ass. That's based on other people who've worked for the PSA, know how much they're paid. They're paid to be employed activists, effectively doing a campaign on behalf of the members. I don't remember voting on it. I don't remember being asked if we thought that was necessary. Climate change is obviously a big issue, but do I actually think the PSA needs a full-time climate change activist? You know, no one fucking asked me, you know. Well, it does. It sounds like make work for leftists, doesn't it?
Very. Tom's a bit embarrassed that he missed out on the PSA Twitter page.
That's right. Yeah. Well, they're very kind to us. They do retweet us now and then, so I shouldn't be too mean.
Thomas messaged me today and said, "Oh, we can't be mean to them now because they've retweeted our opinion."
It's all right. It's after 5 o'clock.
Very low bar.
It's after 5 p.m. They won't be watching. They won't be. Sorry, it's 4:30. 4:30. Yeah. Anyway, that's me.
So there were 2 questions there, is that right?
Yeah, kind of.
And I've got one question as well. Just about delegates and what their role is, like earlier on. How much of a delegate's role is it holding management to account? And like you touched on it a little bit, and I like that. I want to hear more about that.
Look,
Sorry, I don't
maybe,
invade on yours.
I can only speak from my experience, and we encourage our delegates to hold our managers to account very much so.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a delegate today. The details of it don't matter. There was a particular issue. He was a bit annoyed about it, and I said to him, right, okay, you write an email. Either go and talk to him, write an email to your manager if you want to formalise it. Write an email to the manager, request a meeting with him and the responsible HR person and myself, and then we'll discuss it in person. So yes, if you're an active delegate, you should be holding your manager to account. And if your manager is dismissing you pull in your organiser or your branch official or whoever else, and then you try and get it sorted. Unless you do that, they're never going to take you seriously. I mean, we still have active elections, and we try and have as many delegates as possible. I realise that my situation is somewhat different from some of the other people up here where there are not many other members in their work area. That poses very different challenges. But you shouldn't be afraid. I mean, you've got all the membership behind you. You've got the power of the union behind you. Unless you actually exercise and demonstrate that power sometimes, managers won't take it seriously. And even if you do, they might not want to take you seriously. So, I mean, one memorable situation I had, and this is going back a few years now, when we had a very acrimonious relationship with our managers at the port. And it was my direct manager in my work area. There was a member who had tried to insist that people not go out and drive straddle carriers because there was what he perceived, and he's a health and safety rep, as a safety issue. That manager came down and spoke to those people, says, if you don't go out and drive, I'm going to be, the company's going to be taking you to court. So basically, he then insisted, and everybody else went out there, but this one guy, our health and safety rep, and he was then called into a disciplinary meeting. Now, at that point, I hadn't been branch secretary for very long, and because this guy was my direct manager, he thought this was going to be a pleasant conversation about this renegade person. I got in there, and the HR lady introduced it and said, okay, what seems to be the issue? And he says, excuse me, I want to say something. I just tore into that manager. And I said to him, how dare you threaten our members with legal action? You've now got an issue with me and the wider union. Pull your bloody head in. I without swearing, he was quite shocked. And the HR lady was just smiling because she knew he'd overstepped the bounds. You need to be prepared to do that sometimes. But if you haven't got the backing of your members, then you're in trouble because then you're on your own. And that's why organising any kind of event from time to time, along the lines of what Al was describing, that is how you build solidarity among your members. And the struggle never ends. So it's not about a one-time action. It's not about doing something that's going to solve all your problems overnight. Because, as I say, managers come and go. You're always going to be dealing with different people. But if you don't take that stand, then sure, the managers have got the law on their side. The law is not in our favour, and they will use their managerial prerogative, and they'll use the legislation against you. Have any of you ever been through dispute resolution? Have you ever been to the Employment Relations Authority? Anyone? Man, it can take forever. Before you get your case heard, it can take a year. And by that time, the person's been long sacked. And then even if it gets found in your favour, then the employer can dispute it, take it to the court, and it just goes on. So even though, actually in my time at Lyttelton, we've had a few good wins at the ERA, it's not a process you want to take lightly because you don't get satisfaction quickly, if at all.
The question you had around education, it's interesting, because that's something I've always thought that, what I've found over the years especially with NZNO, is that a lot of members would see the union as a service. They would just expect things from it, and they don't really understand what a union is.
You kind of want to feed it into them sometimes and go, it's in the name.
Yeah.
We're a union of people and you're one part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's changing because today I had a delegate Zoom session which was all about collectivism, which was essentially a bit of a unions 101 plus what is capitalism, a bit of a history of how capitalism came about, that sort of stuff, which is I don't know how long that's been running, but it was quite refreshing and I hope that continues. It's interesting, when I did my delegate training some years ago, the delegate, the educator for that session was an actual Trump supporting ex-military officer from the UK. I don't know where NZNO found her, but she was terrible and would often clash in those delegate training sessions. Thankfully now, with the educator for the southern region is actually a member of the Otago Socialist Society and who took the session that we had today, so that was really refreshing. So yeah, education in that respect within the union, that there needs to be a lot more of it, that real sort of, when you join a union, you get some basic education on what you're actually joining, what your responsibilities are to that collective body, that kind of stuff. That's definitely something that's needed.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I guess the starting point is because union density is so low in New Zealand these days. A lot of people work in non-unionised work sites. A lot of that traditional education that took place, which still happens at my work site, is we've got people who work on the waterfront have worked there for 40 years. And so those guys, and they're predominantly guys, have been through a lot. And just the knowledge and experience that they convey to the workers coming in. Now, that kind of thing has been lost on a lot of work sites. So that, the transfer of knowledge that traditionally happened on work sites all around the country, from the old guard to the youngsters coming into those work sites, that's sadly been lost in a lot of places. So the education is important, and remembering our history, because there's an illustrious history of unionism in this country, we need to celebrate those things sometimes. I was really proud and happy to be part of that session we did over at Lyttelton last year for around the waterfront strike, and Tom organised that largely with my counterpart at Munns, because it's their building we used, the wounds over at Lyttelton. That was great. Now, there weren't a huge number of people that came there, but it's not a large venue. It was fairly full. A lot of locals, came as well, who are interested in that, and who have, family members or ancestors. There's not many people alive from that time anymore. That and that also, that collective memory is necessary to foster. So we have to be very proactive in that kind of thing. It is challenging, I agree, but the struggle goes on.
It does.
So just a quick segue before we continue to go on through the night. I know that we are getting to about.
I thought you were going to say before we wrap up, and we said continue. I was like,
You've got something to
It's your meeting, mate.
I will wrap it up now. I hope we've ended on a good point.
I was listening. Questions from the floor.
We've been taking them.
What I might suggest is that if we wrap it up now on stage at least, if any of our wonderful guests are hospitable enough to ask some questions throughout, a glass or two of beer, probably the better way of continuing on through the night. Again, a massive thank you to everybody who's shown up tonight, and especially to our four guests on stage. I do like how when asking some questions, some of the more trickier ones, we don't just get, we get an answer, and we also get 4 answers, which is 4 times better than one.
Get 10 answers off 4 people, yeah.
Do keep an eye out for, there's a poster on the wall around the corner which will describe what we're doing through the rest of these 3 months remaining of our winter program. We've got film screenings every month, the next one being good. Bob Roberts. 2 more sort of public events like this, and Quentin is hosting a what do we call it? It's a workshop.
Introduction to Political Economy workshop on Sundays.
As Shannon said. Which I got the first one, it was very good, and I don't think that if you've missed the first one, you'll be at a loss. It's very well run. And also just a special mention to Shannon's podcast, the radio show, The End of History, which is available through our website and live on Plains FM, or at least I think it's on our website, or you can find a link to it.
Yeah.
That comes out monthly and is very good. Highly recommend you to check it all out. Thank you all again. It's been terrifying hosting one of these for the first time. You've made it so easy, so thank you.
Thanks, Dick.
I just asked for a final word because I just wanted to plug the Maritime campaign that NZNO has undertaken, because essentially, unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that the situation in the health sector now is beyond crisis. It's honestly at the verge of collapse. I don't know how we're going to get through winter. EDs like Dunedin has just announced that they're basically suspending all elective surgery. We did that at Christchurch last week. The problem with that is that it just pushes the problem out. If people don't die while they're waiting, their conditions become more acute, and then when it has to be dealt with down the track, it's even worse. Staffing issues are just chronically, I just can't stress how bad it is at the moment. And one of the things with Marangi Mai is that it's a campaign which Marangi Mai means rise up, and it's basically a campaign within NZNO to try and bring about not only equity for a female-dominated industry within the DHBs, but parity for all nurses and HCAs throughout New Zealand, because at the moment in primary healthcare and in Māori health providers and aged care, they can earn up to 20% less than what we earn in the DHBs. And so part of the campaign is that we want to see parity right across, so that doesn't matter where you work, you earn the same amount. You don't earn less because you work in an aged care facility. There's also, other aspects of the campaign around staffing, legally legislated ratios or something. Essentially, it's about trying to politicise the issues that we face within the health sector, and with an election next year, making it a major issue within the elections. So I urge people to, doesn't matter what set of healthcare workers are out on strike, or whether it's, allied health workers, whether it's nurses, whether it's orderlies, whether it's whoever, to support it and to get out there on the picket lines and to write letters to the editor, to write politicians, to support every time we have a rally, and to because it's really needed, because what we do is for everyone. That's about all I have to say about it.
No, I appreciate that.